Chapter 17. As dusk fell, they approached a winding, miles-long band of trees growing beside a creek, or a river Dinah couldn't yet see. They'd left the undulating hills of the Buffalo Valley far behind, the land leveling out again into smaller, gentler slopes. She hadn't spotted anything familiar since yesterday morning. Joseph had taken an easterly course, completely abandoning the trail she'd followed with the posse. She had no idea where they were now. She hoped he did. A commotion of shouting voices and striking hammers made Dinah peer deeper into the darkness ahead. She discerned the faint outline of a house and a bigger, unfinished structure beside it. Joseph shifted in his saddle.
"What's going on up there?"
Men crouched on the slanted roof and carried planks on the ground, while women chatted, laughing children racing between them. The familiar sight tugged on Dinah's heartstrings. "They were having a barn raising."
"What's that?"
he asked. "We had them back home. Whenever a neighbor was putting up his barn, the whole community would come together and build it in a day. There was food and dancing." She sighed.
"Sounds like good memories,"
Joseph replied. He steered well clear of them, and she followed him. But she couldn't help staring as she passed by. A tall, dark-haired man lifted a little girl in his arms and spun her around as she squealed with delight. A smiling woman stood watching them. Dinah's throat burned, tears stinging her eyes. She blinked them back and looked away, riding northwest alongside towering elms and leaning walnut trees. They walked their horses another half-mile before Joseph stopped and said, "Let's camp here." He turned steel into a row of cottonwoods, fluff-covered seeds floating along the breeze. One tickled her cheek, and she glanced at the strong branches sprawling overhead, their heart-shaped leaves whispering of home. A wistful ache filled the hollow of her chest as she ventured into the shadowy grove. Willows wept over the burbling creek, their drooping boughs sighing as Dinah sat cross-legged on her bedroll. Her fingers worked to unbraid her hair, frogs croaking and crickets chirping all around her. Flames sprang up from the pile of broken sticks Joseph had gathered. He gave them an encouraging blow before scooting back against a cottonwood's stalwart trunk. His coat and gloves lay in the grass, his rolled-up sleeves exposing his sinewy forearms. He sat aside his hat and wiped his brow, a lock of dark hair falling over his forehead. As Joseph reached for his saddlebags and dragged them closer, her gaze lingered on his flexed muscles, his broad chest and strong shoulders. How easily those arms had carried her, how tightly they'd held her. His eyes met hers, and Dinah's fingers fumbled. "How much food have you got left?" she asked, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment.
"Couple days' rations,"
he replied as he opened a leather-bound book in his lap.
"We'll have to get more."
"We're going hunting?" He shook his head, his charcoal-wielding hand hovering over the page.
"No, I mean going into town."
She frowned. "You aren't worried about getting caught?"
"I ain't going. You are."
Dinah's eyes widened. "By myself?"
"Mm-hmm,"
Joseph grunted, his charcoal scratching on the paper. Stunned, she stared at him. He trusted her not to run off and leave him? "What town?" she asked.
"The next decent-looking place I see."
Dinah's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Her fingers fell from her unbraided hair. "Do you know where you're going?" Joseph's hand paused.
"Well enough."
"You don't sound like you do." His eyes flashed to hers.
"If we keep heading east, we'll hit Wichita, and I'll know the way from there."
Wichita. She'd never been there, but she'd heard of it, seen the name on a sign when she got off the train in McPherson. Wichita was on the line that ran north to Salina. "Are we taking a train?"
"Not if I can help it,"
he muttered. Dinah's heart sank. He didn't want to get recognized. She understood that. But she didn't know how many more days she could spend in the saddle, achy and weary as she was. Her fever had broken last night. That was an improvement. But she had a ways to go yet. Firelight flickered on Joseph's concentrated features, and Dinah's curiosity got the better of her. "You draw?"
"Sometimes,"
he mumbled. "I can't draw to save my life," she said with a wry smile.
"Mine ain't no good either."
"Can I see him?" she ventured. His hand froze, his eyes darting to hers.
"No."
Dinah flinched at the gruffness of his answer and lowered her gaze to the crackling flames.
"Shouldn't have asked. Trust me, they ain't worth seeing,"
Joseph added, softer this time. The charcoal resumed its quiet scratching, and she picked up a twig, turning it over and over in her fingers. She could try to sleep, but she doubted she'd be able to. She couldn't stop thinking about that family and their blissful happiness, their peace and contentment, their wholeness. Will I ever have that? The twig snapped, and Dinah threw it into the fire. The flames sparked and spat as she looked over at her hat. At the rifle, Joseph had returned, and her walking stick. Not this time, she decided. Maybe her leg would recover faster if she didn't rely on the stick so much. Grimacing, Dinah got to her feet, and he frowned at her.
Where are you going?
For a walk, she said. The rustling of the cottonwoods was like gently falling rain, soothing her restless spirit as she followed the creek southeast. Dinah glimpsed its flowing waters through gaps in the trees on her left, the silvery light of the waxing moon drifting through their leaves. Against all odds, she'd survived, escaped Sal's clutches when he tried to snuff her out. But what about Lawrence, Brooks and Badger, Jill and Marshall Tupper? Jill had risked her life going to Beaver to warn the posse, and Lawrence had risked his riding out into the dunes to find her. A crushing weight drove an anguished sigh from Dinah's lungs. She couldn't bear the thought of losing another friend, losing them because of her own failure, her reckless, foolish mistake. Lawrence had yelled at her to wait, but she'd ignored him, chased after Joseph and Nieto anyway. The lively plucking of a banjo and the strumming of a guitar stalled her spiraling thoughts. Dinah paused and listened. The brisk bowing of a fiddle and the hum of a harmonica drifted along the breeze. I'm getting close. The cheerful melody reeled her in, drawing her to the edge of the woods. The single-story house sat just beyond the shade of the trees, warm light spilling through a window's half-opened shutters. Her heart squeezed as she glimpsed whirling skirts and grinning faces, heard stamping boots and merry laughter. That used to be me. She thought she'd be married by now, living on a homestead somewhere or roaming the western frontier. But after she'd refused August's proposal, no other suitor had ever come along. Of course not. How could she expect to meet anyone when she avoided dances and parties like the plague? Some silly part of her had believed the right man would magically appear, that he'd find her somehow. No matter how desperately she hid herself away, that she'd know the moment she laid eyes on him. As the song ended, Dinah's nails dug into the trunk of the mulberry she hid behind. A prickling sensation made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. I'm not alone. She spun around and gasped, her hand flying to her chest. She had a good mind to let him have it for startling her. But as she opened her mouth to do just that, Joseph offered her his hand. Dinah's tongue turned to lead. Is he mocking me? Blood boiling, she glared at him. But she didn't detect a trace of humor on his face. He'd taken off his gun belt and his spurs. He's serious, she realized. Dinah swallowed and took a hesitant step toward him. She hadn't danced in years. Would she remember how? What would her mother think? Her father?
Don't forget what he is,
Lawrence had warned her, heart pounding. She placed her hand in Joseph's. Hers seemed so small in comparison. I haven't washed it, she remembered, panicking as he drew her to him. That mortifying thought, and every other thought, was obliterated when he put his left hand on the small of her back. Dinah averted her gaze as she rested her right hand on his shoulder. Why'd you follow me?
I was worried about you,
he said. The players took up a slower, more tender tune that she instantly recognized as Rose of Killarney, a ballad, a love song. Her cheeks flushed, and Joseph stepped to the side, leading with confidence, easing into a leisurely rhythm at odds with the violent beating of her heart. He's no stranger to dancing. She'd always been decent enough at it, but she had a tendency to step on her partner's feet. Dinah glanced down as they swayed with the lilting melody. How many women had he danced with? How many of them better than her? Joseph squeezed her hand, and she looked up at him, his mouth slanted in a crooked smile, and Dinah felt as if a cage of butterflies had been freed in her stomach. He raised her arm above her head, and she gave him her best twirl, ignoring the twinge in her leg. A grin split her face. The warmth of his fingers and the light in his eyes melting the icy walls guarding her heart. The spring snow of the cottonwoods fluttered around them as they pulled apart, hands grasped and arms stretched to their limits. Dinah giggled when they came together again, and Joseph laughed. Actually laughed. A soft, throaty sound that was music to her ears. Round and round they went, and each time she spun back into his arms, they came a little closer. The fiddle crooned through the window, moonlight dappling the leaf-scattered ground. He dipped her backward, and Dinah glimpsed the stars, gripping his hand as she kicked up her heel. Her heart soared as he raised her, her spirit singing as the final notes faded into silence. Their feet had stilled, but the world kept spinning. Breathless and captivated, she stared up at him, their faces inches apart. Joseph laced his fingers through hers, pressing their palms together, and a shiver ran through her. The fire blazing in his eyes both terrified and excited her. I shouldn't, but oh, how she wanted to. He stooped farther, drifted even closer. Dinah didn't retreat. Something had taken hold of her. Something she could no longer deny or resist. Joseph leaned in as she closed her eyes, frozen and trembling. She felt the warmth of his breath, and then he kissed her. Nothing could have prepared her for it. Gentle, but mind-numbing in its power. Strange and new, but not at all unpleasant. Dinah's eyes fluttered open. Why'd he stop? Joseph stayed close, his burning gaze searching hers, waiting, asking. She untwined her fingers from his and reached up. Reverently, she touched his face, her thumb brushing his cheekbone and her hand coming to rest against his stubbled jaw. Dinah glanced at his mouth, an overwhelming impulse banishing every fear and doubt. She stretched up and pressed her lips to his, her heart thumping so wildly she felt as if it would burst from her chest. She didn't have a clue what she was doing, but she had no intention of disappointing. Dinah kissed him harder, wrapping her other arm around his neck and threading her fingers through his soft hair. She'd been wanting to do that for a while now. If the sigh he breathed was anything to go by, maybe she was doing something right. Joseph pushed forward, his hands on her waist. She clung to him for balance, almost tripping over her own feet. Her back hit the nearest tree, and he pinned her there, his kisses deepening. It took her by surprise when his tongue skimmed across her lips. Dinah hated herself even as she parted them. He delved into her mouth, and a moan escaped her. She savored each thrilling sensation, the taste of him and the way their tongues tangled, losing herself in the blinding heat of it. A chorus of voices spilled out into the night, and Joseph broke the kiss. Dinah's eyes flew open. Dazed and disoriented, she glanced over at the stream of people issuing through the door of the house and saying their goodbyes. Suddenly, she remembered where she was, that they weren't far from a crowd of strangers who'd consider them trespassers, shielded only by darkness and clustered cottonwoods. Joseph didn't seem to care. He turned to her, his breaths hot and heavy. The intensity of his gaze made her weak in the knees. He leaned in to claim her lips again, and she almost let him. Wait, she managed, and Joseph drew back. He looked so young in that moment, his brow furrowed with concern, and his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. Dinah stopped and swallowed, the gravity of what had just happened sinking in. We should get out of here before someone sees us. He blinked as if waking up from a dream. Yeah. He straightened and raked a hand through his tousled hair. You're right. What have I done? She thought as Joseph went to pick up his gun belt. What have I done?